Well, welcome back to our Wednesday night Bible study. We will continue to do this tonight as long as we have power. A lot of storms here in the DMV area, and so if the Bible study should stop short this evening, we'll just pick up next week wherever we leave off today. So hope that you guys have had a good week. Hope you have stayed cool and hope you have stayed dry. It's been hot and wet in this area, particularly today. I don't think that Molly is going to be much a part of this evening because she has kennel cough. And so she's just started her first round of antibiotics and she's trying to sleep it off. So Molly the Beagle is going to be a very attentive, well, very quiet, non-invasive person here.
Tyler Stegos has no power.
Tyler has no power? Oh, wow. Well, we're doing okay here so far. So
far, being the key.
well, I'm always wanting to leave open. I don't like absolute statements, for the most part. Anyway, so I don't think I have any announcements. We're going to finish up. Last week we got through the Passion. Cindy has changed her location now, so I'm going to have to watch for you later. No, we got to the Passion. We're going to go through the Passion tonight and hopefully get to the end. You've moved, so
I'm with the dog.
yeah, yes, I know you're attending to the baby, so I understand. So anyway, Tom, you ready?
Yep.
You're good? We're good? All right, let's continue on. Uh, Large part of the Gospel of Mark is dedicated to the Passion. And as we said, it was the road to Jerusalem for the whole second half of the book. Well, now he finally gets there. And it basically shows the death and resurrection of the suffering servant and what servant is really like. The Son of Man has come to serve. And we get the continued proof that no one has any idea what's going on. From no one understands Jesus. So let's look at some of these vignettes here. It was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people. While he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar, a very costly ointment of nard, and broke open the jar and poured the ointment on his head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, why was this ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and the money given to the poor, and they scolded her. But Jesus said, let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me, for you will always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish, but you will not always have me. She's done what she could. She's anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly, I tell you, whenever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. A lot of stuff going in here, but again, moving toward the cross. So again, although we've had the Jesus predicting his death and resurrection 3 times up to this point, now those events are being set in motion. His body is being anointed now for burial prior to the crucifixion. We also have the famous passage that is so often misused to justify not reaching out and helping the poor. Well, you'll always have them with you, so why do anything to them? Which is absolutely not the point. Jesus is certainly referencing Deuteronomy 15 here, where God is saying, because the poor will be in the land, you will need to extend kindness to them on a regular basis. And so the fact that the poor are still in the land is evidence that you haven't been extending kindness to them on a regular basis. So if anything, an indictment more than it is justification for why it's okay to not help the poor, which is a tragic way to read the Bible, by the way. If you're looking for loopholes, that's a sad hermeneutic in my mind. Well, sure it is. It's just a bad one. Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. When they heard it, they were greatly pleased and promised to give him money. So he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. Judas is an interesting character because the Gospels don't spend a lot of time on him. John likes to mention, saying that he kept the treasury and stole from it. But most of the other times you don't get a lot of detail on this. And there's another thing about Judas that's curious, and it happens actually at the meal. So we'll look at the meal here in a second. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, his disciples said to him, where do you want us to go to make preparations for you to eat the Passover? So he sent 2 of his disciples, saying to them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you and follow him. We don't know this for sure, but it has been speculated that this individual could be an Essene. The only reason I say that is because Essenes tended to be men. They tend to be celibate. Women tend to be the ones who would draw water. And so to have a man drawing water would be more of a distinctive and might be something that Jesus had arranged ahead of time, very possibly. That's a possible way to read that. Wherever he enters, say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, where's my guest room? Where is my guest room? Where may I eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there. So the disciples set out, went to the city, found everything as he told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. So Jesus prophesying these things are happening and going to the upper room, the first time we get that reference here in the synoptics. When it was evening, he came with the 12, and when they had taken their places and were eating, Jesus said, truly, I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. Now, this is one of the things I find very interesting about the story, is that the next verse is not all of the disciples going, it's Judas, isn't it? I bet it is. You know it's Judas. I mean, just look at him. Eyes are too close together, got that twirly mustache. Absolutely. It's got to be Judas. It's not what they say. They began to distress and say to one another, surely not I. Am I the one who's going to betray you? I didn't think I was going to be the one. And so I've always found Judas very interesting because Judas is he's I think he kind of scared the disciples because I think they realized it could have been any one of them who took this on. I also wonder exactly what Judas's motivation is. I mean, if he is one of the Sicarii, if he is a nationalist and he thinks that Jesus is the Messiah, he truly believes this, then looking for a chance to betray him might actually be looking for a chance to bring these things to a head for Jesus to be the militant Messiah that he wants, finding an opportunity, finding a place to give Jesus the opportunity to spring into action for the crowds to get roused. I actually think his motivation could very well be, it's self-motivated because it's his conception of what Messiah should be, but not out of I'll show Jesus, I'll give him over to the chief priests, and more out of, okay, Jesus, here we go, now's our chance. And then when Jesus is crucified, realizing that he's completely screwed everything up, that's when the guilt takes over. So I wonder about Judas. I don't know. I mean, we just don't have enough information to have that kind of speculation about him, frankly. But he's always been an interesting character to me because the disciples didn't all assume it was Jesus. Well, I guess with the exception of John. I mean, John thought it was going to be Judas the whole time. But the rest of these disciples, the rest of the synoptics, they don't all. I bet it's Judas. It's got to be Judas. Judas is a dude. While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it and gave it to them and said, this is my body. Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all drank from it. He said to them, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly, I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it anew in the kingdom of God. So when they had sung the hymn, which hymn? Well, one of the hymns from Psalm 114 to 118. It's one of those Passover hymns. Those are regularly sung. So we're assuming it's one of those Psalms that they sang. Just FYI, just thought you'd like to know that would be the assumption, that that's one of the hymns they would sing. They went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said, you will all become deserters, which is not really a nice thing to say. I mean, maybe he was saying you all want dessert. And because you don't think that, no, maybe so. You all become deserters, for it is written. Yeah, that's right. It's just an S. I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter said to him, even though all become deserters, I will not. Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said vehemently, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all of them said the same. I think all of them are ready to die in an armed rebellion. They are not ready to die the way Jesus is going to die. That's why I think Judas is, all right, we're going to do this now. Are you guys ready? It's time. We're going to do this. And they're all, I mean, like Peter, when after the confession, you're just being negative, Jesus. It's not going to happen.
They think it's going to be like Les Mis.
Exactly. They could be like Les Mis. But when Jean Valjean walks out, that just ruins everything, right? I'm not going, what is he doing? Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Yeah, they're ready for a fight. But that's not what happens. In fact, he stops them when they start that. They went to a place called Gethsemane. He said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be distressed and agitated and said to them, I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and keep awake. And going a little further, he threw himself on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. He said, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, the cup that he just had, the new covenant in the meal. Just had that. Could we pass on that? Because this is terrible. Is there any way around this? This, by the way, not the Jesus you see in the Gospel of John. Jesus in the Gospel of John, totally in control, never praying for the disciples in the garden, never goes out to meet the temple guards, not seized by the temple guards. Uh, John, Jesus is completely in control. Mark's Jesus, very human. Um, it's a high Christology, Son of God, but at the same time, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, what you want. And he came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And once more he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy. I've had nights like that. We've all had nights like that. And they did not know what to say to him because they were sleeping. That's probably why they didn't know what to say to him. He came a third time and said, are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Enough, the hour's come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's be going. My betrayer is at hand. So, by the way, one of the best representations I've ever seen of this is at the Abbey of Gethsemane, just south of Louisville. It's a beautiful Trappist abbey in Trappist, Kentucky, interestingly enough, just south. And about a quarter of a mile back into the woods from the abbey, there are life-size statues that have been carved or cast. And Jesus is in this clearing on his knees in agony. I have an image of a picture of it in my office of Jesus crying out into heaven that this moment would pass. But before you get to Jesus, about 30 feet in front of that are 3 giant sleeping life-size disciples, which are fascinating. It's beautiful, just a beautiful picture. And actually was donated in memory of an Episcopalian seminarian named Jonathan Daniels, who died during the civil rights movements in Alabama. He went, I believe he was from Massachusetts, and he went to Alabama to help during the civil rights period and was shot by a sheriff there, saving the life of a young African-American girl. And his parents actually commissioned these statues that they placed at this abbey. And his image is in the National Cathedral. He's one of the well, what would I call it? They're icons, basically, in the National Cathedral in one of the openings there. So I happened to be standing there while a tour guide was giving the tour, and he said, and you might not know who this person is, Jonathan Daniels. And I was standing by, and I went, the seminarian? Really? And I was so excited. Then he looked at me like I was a witch because, nobody ever knew that guy. But I knew the guy because it depicted this image just so powerfully and so beautifully. And so I would encourage you, if you're ever there, if you're ever in Louisville, to find yourself, go down to Trappist, Kentucky, and visit the monks there and find the statues. They're absolutely beautiful. Go on the trail. It's a long walk back into the woods, but it's worth it. Absolutely. So, all right, what are we doing? We're keeping going. That's what we're doing. Immediately, everything's always happening immediately in Mark. While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd of swords and clubs from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. It is the temple guards that are here. It is not the Romans. That's a common misconception. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, the one I will kiss is the man, arrest him and lead him away under guard. So when they came, he went up to him at once, Rabbi, and kissed him. They laid hand on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. So they're ready to spring into action. It's exactly what they said was going to happen. We're ready to fight. And I mean, we don't know who's involved in this. Maybe could have been Judas, who knows? But Jesus said, have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day, I was with you in the temple teaching. You didn't arrest me, but let the scriptures be fulfilled, all of them. Let the scriptures be fulfilled. All of them deserted him and fled. So it didn't go the way they thought. It didn't turn into an all-out fight. It didn't turn out into an all-out brawl. The disciples weren't going to be fighting the temple guards. When Jesus just decides to go with them, they are completely confused and they spread. Then we get a really curious insertion into the Gospel of Mark, which has created a great deal of speculation. A certain young man was following him wearing nothing but a linen cloth. So just basically a nightshirt, a really long nightshirt that would go under your regular clothes. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked, which is sort of an interesting verse just to throw into the passion narrative.
Odd detail.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Steve says I've always had a problem with this.
Oh, good. Maybe I can help. Steve, you've always had a problem with the young man? Is that the part? The naked young man running off? I have to see if that's the case.
Howard Carpenter said that monks make great bourbon fudge.
Monks do make great bourbon fudge. In fact, those monks, make great bourbon fudge. Those specific monks. They're from Kentucky. Okay, that's fine. We'll get to that. There is speculation that, I mean, and this is probably a popular theory that, all of our gospels are anonymous, and that,
Not that.
no, what bothers him then?
Jesus had been preaching peace and love for 3 years, and Peter's first thought is to take out a sword.
Yeah, we don't know if it's Peter here, but we do know you're exactly right. One of them's first thought is to take out the sword. But
Say what
he said that Jesus has been preaching peace and love for 3 years, and the disciples' first thought is to take out the sword. It absolutely reinforces that they don't understand what Jesus. I mean, Jesus has been telling them, "I'm going to be handed over to the chief priests, and I'm going to be crucified." And they keep telling him, "No, you're not." And so when he's handed over, they still haven't gotten it. I mean, the disciples do not get the message in Mark at all, completely missing the point. And you're exactly right. Um, there is speculation that the Gospel of Mark, like all our canonical Gospels, is anonymous, and that perhaps this is a young John Mark who has inserted himself into the story anonymously, but to say that this is what happened. I was there. They got
credibility.
got me out of the store. Well, if nothing else, just to add this little detail that he might have been there.
A certain young man.
A certain young man. Yeah. The irony is the way you phrase that is that it means just a dude most of the time. We would say a certain young man, as in, I know a certain fella's birthday, and we mean it's actually somebody in particular. In the Greek, when they say a certain man went from Jericho down up to Jerusalem, a dude. Yeah. So there's this dude that goes, that's all they mean with that. They don't mean anybody in particular. So that might create a false sense of identity there.
Cedra. Didn't Jesus ask them before if they had a sword? Maybe a different gospel.
Different gospel. Yeah. The if you have, Bob wants to know if Jesus asked if they had swords, and that is in a different gospel. And actually, he's undermining the sword point with that. The disciples aren't understanding that in Luke any better. But yes, he does ask them if they have a sword, though he's not talking about the sword, though that they think he's talking about the sword. And he finally just says, "You know what? Enough of the sword talk. We're forget the swords. You guys aren't getting the swords." A certain young man is, so there was this guy. That would be probably a better way to translate it. And he was with him, and he only had a white robe, and the soldiers grabbed it, and he ran off naked. What's the point of this story? There's actually a really cool thing here, and I'm trying to decide whether or not to tell you now or to tell you later. No, I may need to save and build to it at the end of this tonight. I'm not going to not tell you tonight, but I think it's even cooler. I know you do hate that. That same young man grew up to be Richard Nixon. No, that's not the point of the story. Grew up to be Jesus. No, that's not the point. I will get there. I'm going to say, remember this young man who ran off without his white robe naked. Kind of hard to forget that guy. So, the guy streaking through Jerusalem. Try to remember him. We'll come back to that young man, Will Ferrell. No, we're about to hear another Mark and sandwich. Jesus has two trials, one before the Sanhedrin. Then we have an interruption and get the trial of Peter sitting by the fire, of whether or not he's going to confess. And then we get the trial before Pilate. So we have two trials of Jesus around the trial of Peter. Really cool aspect of this too, though. The Mark, if it wasn't for Mark's bad Greek, I would love his organization. It's just, he does some really great stuff. They took Jesus to the high priest. All the chief priests, the elders, the scribes were assembled. Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. So he's doing okay. Good for him. He was sitting with the guards, warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. Many gave false testimony against him. Their testimony didn't agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, I'll destroy this temple that's made with hands, and in 3 days I'll build another not made with hands." But even on this point, their testimony didn't agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But he was silent and did not answer, which is going to make the guy upset. And again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Jesus said, "Yep, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power." So he actually alludes to the Psalm 110 passage, telling him this, and coming with the clouds of heaven, which then alludes to the Daniel passage that we talked about as well. Well, that's it. That's blasphemy, right? The high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we need witnesses? You've heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" And all of them condemned him as deserving death. Some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." The guards also took him over and beat him. Okay. What's the last thing they tell him to do? Right. So what happens? The next part of the story. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls, the high priest, came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I don't know or understand what you're talking about." He went out into the forecourt. The cock crowed. The servant girl, on seeing him, began again to say to bystanders, "This man's one of them." But again he denied it. After a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you're one of them. You're Galilean." But he began to curse and swore an oath, "I do not know the man you are talking about." At that moment, the cock crowed for the second time. Then Peter remembered that Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. Meaning, of course, that Jesus and is a true prophet. Yeah. So the last thing I say is prophesy, and then we get an example of Jesus's prophecy come true in this.
Wow.
And then we jump back to Pilate. So we interrupt this. Oh, by the way, Jesus is a true prophet. And then we get back to the as soon as it was morning, because you can't put anyone to death at night. You actually can't render a judgment at night, I believe, according to the Sanhedrin. You have to wait till the next morning. So the next morning at daylight, all right, so 6 in the morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, handed him over to Pilate. Pilate said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered, "Well, you say so." Then the chief priests accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. Now, at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone whom they asked. Now, a man called Barabbas was in prison with rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So it would seem to imply that Barabbas is the kind of political insurgent that the disciples were after. An insurrection, rebels, killed some people. And so it kind of looks like Barabbas is actually kind of what they're wanting here. So the crowd came before and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. So which crowd is standing in the consulate outside at 6 in the morning on a holiday? I'm assuming a rent-a-crowd. I mean, I just assume this is some sort of arrangement by those who want Jesus dead, because I have a hard time believing that a casual group of people were standing at the Roman. Why are we up this early? Why does this even matter? So I don't. I think this is not just the general crowd. Now, other gospels seem to imply it's the crowd, like just the general crowd in Jerusalem. This one, I don't know so much. This one it's an odd timing of it all as it tells the story. Then he answered, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he realized it was out of jealousy that the chief priest had handed him over. But the chief priest stirred the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate spoke to them again. "Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" They shouted, "Crucify him." Pilate asked them, "What evil has he done?" But they shouted more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas to them, and after flogging Jesus, handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers led him into the courtyard of the palace, that is the governor's headquarters, and called together the whole court, and they clothed him in purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him. They began to saluting him, "Hail, King of the Jews," struck his head with a reed, spat upon him, knelt down and homaged him, and after mocking him, they stripped him of his purple cloak, put his own clothes back on him, and led him out to crucify him. So rejected by both Jews and Gentiles is the point of this story, right? There's no one group more responsible for crucifixion here than any other. He's rejected by Gentiles. He's rejected by Jews. He's rejected by everyone. And the disciples don't understand. He's rejected by his disciples. They didn't understand. He's rejecting Jesus in this story. And again, in the country to carry his cross, it was Simon Cyrene, the father of Alexander. Yeah, well, that's a good guess, or at least from Egypt. I don't know who I saw Alexander and Rufus or Simon are. It is suggested. I mean, there are some suggestions that people who get name checked in Gospels probably were leaders in the early church. Okay, I mean, that makes some sense to me. It does seem as though we're being told these people's names as though we're going to know who the people are. So I'm not. Oh, right. Alexander and Rufus. Sure. Great kids. Maybe. I don't know. They brought Jesus in place of the skull, and they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. And they crucified him and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. Again, drawing those references in the prophets, fulfilling all of this. 9 o'clock in the morning, where they crucified him, the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him, they crucified two bandits, one on his right, one on his left. And then we understand when the disciples said they wanted to be on his right and left, what that meant, that they really didn't know what they were asking. Those who passed by derided them, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha, you would have destroyed the temple and build it in 3 days. Save yourself and come down from the cross." I should also say that although in the movies, crucifixion's always, way up high, crucifixion usually took place about 3 feet above the ground and on major highways. They wanted to make sure that people could see and deride. It was going to be, it is a death meant to humiliate and shame, and you wanted people to have access to that humiliation and shame. And so it happened low to the ground and right in people's faces along the roads that they would travel. So that's why they're able to, passerbys are able to, it's not like they had to climb anywhere. They were probably going by and were able to mock just like everybody else. In the same way, the chief priests and the scribes also mocked him among themselves, saying, "He saved others, can't save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now so we may see and believe." And those who were crucified with him also taunted him. So that's the two guys, one on the right and one on the left, both of them taunting him in Mark. It's amazing how we conflate all these gospels together, isn't it?
That's not how the story
That's not how the story goes. That's not how some of the stories goes. That's how this story goes. Nobody gets it. Not even the people on the cross.
But not the people on the cross, the people that are literally going to die like he is.
Correct. At least we're not that guy. I guess. I don't know. It's kind of hard for me. It doesn't seem like you got a lot of moral authority when you're being crucified next to the dude, but apparently. Well, can you imagine being that guy? That'd be embarrassing, I guess. Anyway, that's rough. That is rough. All right, so now comes one of the most compelling parts of this story. And I will confess that I only came to this interpretation about, well, literally 10 years ago. It was in the spring of 2010. I know this because I remember the guy who was talking about it. He had presented at a AAR meeting. Yes? Always look on the bright side of life. Absolutely. I'm Brian, and so's my wife. Anyway, this next part is really, really cool. So stay with me. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's in Aramaic. In Hebrew, it would be Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, but the oi is the Aramaic. So Matthew says it in Hebrew. In Mark, he says it in Aramaic. But he speaks Aramaic. Now, of course, previously in the gospel, when Jesus spoke Aramaic, Talitha kum, the little girl came back to life, right? So here he cries out in Aramaic in prayer. By the way, not Abba Father, like he was praying earlier. This one is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Quoting, of course, Psalm 22, this cry of desperation, this feeling of complete abandonment. And in this moment of brutal honesty, when he is crying out to God in complete despair, someone said, when some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he's calling for Elijah." They can't even get that right. I mean, they don't even understand his last cries of dereliction from the cross. Even that they're confused by. But they say, "Wait, let's see if Elijah comes to take him down." Then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So this is cool too. There are a lot of interpretations that will say the point of this is that the temple veil is ripped and now people can enter into the temple, right? You don't have that veil anymore. But ripping from top to bottom, as always implied to many interpreters, I mean, going way back, that is not something going in, but something coming out. In fact, this is God coming out of the temple. So put this together. Jesus cries, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Cries out in a loud cry. The temple veil rips. God comes out of the temple to attend to Jesus, who has just cried, "Why have you forsaken me?" Yeah, like the prodigal comes rushing out to Jesus. And when that happens, the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Now, when the centurion who stood facing them saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was God's son." The centurion sees this. Now, we don't know how he understands all of this, but the way Mark is telling the story seems to imply the centurion gets, my God, why have you forsaken me?" God rushes out of the temple, ripping the veil. And the centurion says, this man was God's son. The only person in the entire gospel, the only human being in the gospel to understand Jesus as God's son, something that we, the reader, have known about since verse 1 of this gospel, the only human being to get it, a Roman centurion. He gets it. Not his disciples, not any of the elder leadership in Israel, not his family. The demons got it. God got it.
What about that one guy?
He knew he was Messiah, right? What's that?
What about that one guy that was crazy?
Yeah, well, he seemed to know that God, Gary, the Gerasene demoniac. Yeah, I asked Mike if he thought that you could take Gary's as an implicit confession, and he thought that's probably fair. That Gary probably is at least implicitly confessing that God and Jesus are the same. The centurion gets it and confesses it out loud. He is homoousia. Very good. Thomas dropping the Greek and proving that he is a Nicene creed. Yeah. So homoousias. So what happens? Well, when evening came, I'm sorry, I just love that part of the story to me. I mean, when I first heard that presentation, I literally got chills. When he did it, it was so well done that the last time Jesus spoke Aramaic, a miracle was worked. This time he speaks Aramaic and the temple veil rips and a miracle is worked, if you will. And now God has come out of the temple, which is just, I just think that's powerful and cool. So I can't judge anyone's reactions here. Thomas is very stone-faced, so I don't get anything out of him. Cindy seems to like it. Molly's sleeping through the whole thing. So what are you going to do? She's stirring. She's stretched. I bothered her with that one. When evening had come, and since it was the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, respected member of the council, who was also himself waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. This would be a big deal. Bodies were left to rot off crosses. Because you want to shame the people. You want their bodies to be there so people go by going, man, I don't want to do whatever caused this to happen to this guy. And so taking someone off the cross is unusual. And so he decides apparently to use the argument that, hey, it's the day of preparation and it's a holiday. We don't want, dead guys on the cross. Can we? So boldly is not a bad thing. You go to Pilate and ask for the body of Jesus. Pilate wondered if he was already dead because you could go for several days. You drowned when you are crucified. You're not the lungs fill with water. And so it takes a while. You have to push up on your legs to breathe, but then you can't breathe when that happens. And so it's a terrible way to go. And so he was surprised he was already dead. Summoning centurion, he asked him whether he'd been dead for some time. When he learned from the centurion he was dead, he granted the body to Joseph. Joseph bought a linen cloth and taking down the body, wrapped it in the linen cloth, laid it in a tomb that had been hewn out of the rock. He then rolled a stone against the door of the tomb. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where the body was laid. Question?
Yeah, Bob, well, not really a question,
Mhm.
just a statement. Bob Lucidra. Jesus is God. Jesus is God's son. The Trinity is so confusing.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if you wanted to address that.
Yeah, Jesus is God. Jesus is God's son. The Trinity is so confusing. Yeah, this is an issue that the convention of saying Son of God and understanding that in a first century context, that is going to convey a level of association that we miss. We don't get, coming in the name of the Father as I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't even know if we have any kind of parallel. Speak to my agent on behalf of you. Talk to my agent. You're talking to me, kind of idea. That there is a sense of Son of God that has a closeness that we miss. I mean, it's easier for us to go, well, son. Biologically, they're two different people, but that's not what's being confessed here. I mean, there is a functional confession of divinity all the way through, and it is you're exactly right. Trinity is confusing. And to have Jesus as fully God and fully human at exactly the same time, which has been the Orthodox position of the church for 2,000 years, or 1,700 years officially, homoousios it is. But yeah, it's something that it's foundational to Christian faith. And I think it's something that frankly is easier for the Enlightenment when we're looking for things to have a sense of, I don't know, scientific typology that works better for us and breaks down better for us. So this is one of those times I think we're suffering because we don't use the terms the way they would use the terms. That's what I think is happening there. So yeah, you're right. But that, I mean, I'm not pretending that it's easy on that. So all I know is that for 1700 years of the church, all the church could agree on is if you ever came up with an example for how to explain it, you were a heretic. I mean, that's just, so he's God. You mean like, no, not like that. You're a heretic. Oh, you mean like three masks? No, I'm afraid that's a modalistic heresy. Oh, you mean like oil and water? No, I'm afraid that's also a heresy. Oh, you mean like, it's just, so it's they just decided that it's a mystery that's going to be a mysterion that's going to be accepted, but true. I do love that Mary saw where the body was laid and decided that they were going to need to come back and fix, because Joseph had good intentions and boldness, but that's no way to treat a body. So they're going to obviously come back and treat their body well. He's not in this story. Nicodemus is in John. Yeah. There are also a lot more women in Luke that it's not just these two Marys. So yeah. So, okay. About to get cool. So hang on. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices. I don't know where Mary the mother of Joseph went. She saw where he went, and then she couldn't get up that early, I guess. I don't know. Salome bought spices so they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll the stone away for us from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. No?
Oh, it's a streaker.
It is interesting that our young man lost his white robe when Jesus got arrested, and now there's a young man in a white robe sitting on the right side. Here's what we're missing. Okay, here's something that we're missing. In the early church, you were baptized naked. It was in private. It was not a public event. Okay, no, it was totally different service. You were baptized naked. There were male deacons. There were female deacons. Right? You take off your old clothes. You go into the baptismal waters. When you come out of the baptismal waters, you are given a white robe that symbolizes your faith, your baptism, your new life that is made free. The arrest of Jesus has taken that white robe from that guy. He's lost his faith, if you will. If Mark is written to the church at Rome, there is a very good chance that what Mark is dealing with are individuals who have renounced faith for fear of their life. That they had confessed Christ, but for fear of their life, they have now renounced faith. Now they've come back to church. And they maybe have come back to church and they're worshiping with people who lost family members because they did not renounce their faith. And so what do you do to those who have renounced faith for the sake of their lives and have cast off their baptismal robes, if you will? Well, the faith is restored here, I think. There's a young man in a robe. I think it's a subtle message of hope, of restoration, of really pastoral restoration to a church that is wrestling with this very issue of what do we do with people who have renounced out of fear, because fear is a big deal, as you've seen, for fear of the Jews, for fear of the people, for fear there's a lot of people. Fear is motivating a lot of people in this story. It continues to motivate people. They saw the white guy dressed in a white robe, right, sitting on the right side. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He's been raised. He's not here. Look, there's the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." I've often asked how we're supposed to read the "and Peter." Are we supposed to read this, tell the disciples and, Peter, who's not anymore because he renounced that kind of thing? Or is it tell the disciples, especially Peter, that he's going to Galilee? People that I trust, people that I like, believe that we need to read this as especially. That tell the disciples, especially Peter, because he needs to know that he's going to the Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Verse 8, so they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. The end. It's quite a story.
That's how Mark ends, right?
Yep. If only they would have told someone about Jesus' resurrection. People would have heard about him.
Yeah.
Tough. That is how it ends. That is. It's true. That is how the gospel ends. This is the
Very anticlimactic.
it is, well, what do we do with this
You
ending?
remember in Galahad, the song "Today We Rise," and by the end, he's like the lame is starting to wave.
The lame
flag.
is, he's
By the
waving the
time he
flag.
gets to the end of the scene, it's just him.
It's just him standing there.
Oh.
All the people have left him. Yeah. Go ahead.
Tyler, in 1 Corinthians, Paul also differentiates between Cephas and the 12.
He does.
He also said law Sopranos ending.
What? Sopranos ending.
Tyler said that, not Paul.
Paul, I was saying, I didn't think Paul said it was a Sopranos ending. No, Tyler said it was Sopranos ending. It is. This is
But the 1 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians. Paul does say Cephas and the disciples. Yeah, and that's not uncommon. I think he was thought of as the leader. I mean, it's always him talking, and so yeah, I don't think I think especially is the way to go here. So what is going on with this ending? Well, let's talk about the endings of Mark. There is no section of Mark that has more textual variants than Mark 16, 9 through 20. Now, you'll notice I stopped at verse 8. There are, in some manuscripts, verses 9 through 20. If you had a King James Bible, it's 9 through 20 because it's in the Textus Receptus. However, the Greek of 16, 9 through 20 doesn't read like any of the Greek in the rest of the Gospel of Mark. There are words that aren't used. There is terminology that's used differently than is used in other places. There are more variants in that section than any other place. Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, in other words, the two great manuscripts, two of our four great manuscripts from the 4th and 5th centuries, they end the gospel at 16:8. That's it. There are also some manuscripts that have the longer ending, but add notes to say, some of the early manuscripts, they don't have this part. This is all new. This is DLC. Yes, obviously. This is all fanfic, is what this is. This part is. So what do you do with this? Well, there are some possibilities. It is possible that Mark ended at 16:8. I mean, that's a very good possibility. It's possible that Mark wrote an ending that we don't have anymore. It's also possible that the longer ending of Mark, verses 9 through 20, is authentic. But one of the things that might lead us to this first and I will confess, I think Mark ended at 16:8. I have no problems believing that the original ending is 16:8. Because fear is a theme all through Mark. People are not doing things out of fear, or they're doing things out of fear. And sometimes fear leads to faith. Sometimes fear leads to the rejection of Jesus. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to, we'll set that aside for a second. Cliffhangers are not foreign in the Bible. We have seen cliffhangers before. Acts ends without telling us what happens to Paul. He's under arrest in Romans. He's going to go to trial, and the gospel is preached unhindered, and that's it. The book just ends. The prodigal son's brother's response is unknown. The book of Jonah ends in a cliffhanger. Deuteronomy ends in a cliffhanger. I mean, cliffhangers are not uncommon throughout the biblical text. So I don't think that you can go, well, who would end a gospel like that? They do that. It's not out of the realm of possibility that that's not a really good ending. Also, 9 through 20 have a lot of connections to resurrection appearances elsewhere in other gospels. 9 and 10 look a lot like John 20. Verse 11 looks like Luke 24. 12 and 13 looks like Luke 24. 14 looks like Luke 24. Matthew 28 has the same echoes there. There are also some echoes to some stuff that happens to Paul in the gospel in the book of Acts. So the theory seems to be that a pious scribe, knowing the ending of Matthew by the time he's copying in, say, the 4th century AD, copying the Gospel of Mark, but he knows Matthew, he knows Luke, he knows John, he knows Acts, and obviously you wouldn't end Mark like that. That he synthesized an ending, a longer ending of Mark, which we have here, which then came along for the ride and got copied by the majority manuscripts, and as a result is in the Textus Receptus, and as a result is in the King James Bible, and as a result, people think you're taking stuff out of the Bible if you start taking stuff out. Now, I will, as I said when we talked about text criticism, this is the only section of Scripture for which there is a confession of faith by a subset of Christians that stands or falls on a variant reading. But let's look at this longer ending of Mark. You'll see that, I think you'll hear the echoes from the other Gospels as you go. Now, after he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, for whom he had cast out 7 demons. So that's, like the end of John. She went out and told those who'd been with him, like John, while they were mourning and weeping. But when they heard he was alive and had been seen by her, they wouldn't believe it, also like John. After this, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking in the country. That was that road to Emmaus story I've heard so much about. They went back and told the rest, but they didn't believe them. Later, he appeared to the 11 as themselves as they were sitting at a table, for he upbraided them for their lack of faith and stubbornness, because they had not believed those who saw him after he'd risen. He said to them, "Go into all the world and proclaim the good news to all creation." Sounds a lot like Matthew 28. The ones who believe and is baptized will be saved, but the one who does not believe will be condemned. All these signs will accompany those who believe. By using my names, they'll cast out demons, they'll speak in new tongues, they'll pick up snakes in their hands, they will drink any deadly thing, it won't hurt them. We will lay hands on the sick, they will recover. So then the Lord Jesus, after he'd spoken with them, was taken up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. And they went out and proclaimed the good news everywhere, while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the message by the signs that accompanied it.
Quite a summation there.
It really is. You can hear the summing of all the other gospels in this ending here. So the snake handling churches, this is where they get it. This is where those churches for whom pulling out poisonous snakes in the middle of worship service and passing them around is part of the liturgy is based on this. And I promise you, those churches are King James only, because most Bibles that are translated in the last 100 years have a couple of brackets around this section that say the earliest and most reliable manuscripts don't have these verses. So that's the long story in there. King James doesn't have that because it was translated in 1611 before text criticism was invented. So that's why. Okay. Any questions on that before I sum up, Mark? We're good?
Not at this point.
I like the Mark ending at 16:8. I think that is a compelling ending. The women were afraid and didn't tell anybody anything. So what are you going to do with this confession? What are you going to do with this act? Are you going to be afraid of others, or are you going to confess? Are you going to keep your baptismal robe on and confess that Jesus has risen? I find that to be a way to really draw the reader in to this gospel. So I find it to be a very compelling ending. And it's not like we don't have other resurrection narratives in Matthew and Luke and John. So, like I said, Mark does some very creative things. If his Greek was just better, it would be so much easier. What can we say about the Gospel of Mark? Well, it's brief. Primarily Jesus acting in public. It's very simple. The narrative is very simple, and usually you just connect one story to the next story with and then Jesus did something else. Very graphic detail, and by graphic as in very detailed. We get the name Bartimaeus. We get the details of the day that you don't normally have in other places. You get what people are thinking and their manners and their gestures and what they look like. It's action packed straight away, immediately. I saw one comment once in Mark that said Mark would be the movie script because it hits the ground running. I mean, there's no backstory. There's no Kate, Galadriel. There's no Galadriel overlay, Kelly Blanche. Yeah, the world has changed. You don't have that in the Gospel of Mark. You have that in John. You don't have that in Mark. It's like, you fade from the credits and Jesus is on the scene with John the Baptist, preaching. A lot of action there. Yeah.
Tyler says it fits if it was written during or after Nero's persecution.
Yeah, and I think
Say that.
it fits that the abrupt ending of Mark fits if it's written or associated with Nero's persecutions in the 60s, which is usually when Mark is thought to have been written, is in the 60s. So.
And Matthew says readers are supposed to know the resurrection stories.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Question is, are readers supposed to know the resurrection stories? That is something I think that is probably, we can't take this for granted. We think of the Gospels as ways in which people learned about these stories. But I think it would be better to think of the Gospels as ways in which people learned how to think about these stories. The stories of Jesus' resurrection is, let's say Mark is written in the 60s. His resurrection has been told now for 30 years. By the time Mark is written down, the letters of Paul are in circulation. The resurrection of Jesus is a confession of Christians. So this gospel written for Christians, they know about the resurrection of Jesus. How are you thinking about it? What do you do with it? So I don't think they needed And then people saw him. And as though, I mean, no one in the church is going to be like, well, I wasn't going to believe in Jesus, but then I read the part about him appearing to Mary. And so I guess it happened. Who takes the word of an angel these days? I mean, so it's not, that's not the sense of it. They aren't really doing that. The gospels are helping shape how you are supposed to think about these stories that they already are knowing about, a Christ who has risen. Yeah.
Val just said that line was worth the price of admission.
Okay. Okay. Who listens to angels? A lot of action in Mark, as I said, more miracles to parables, right? 18 miracles. There are 4 parables in Mark. So it is a lot of action, as opposed to, say, John, where you get 7 miracles and chapters of philosophical speeches. No parables in John, just chapter after chapter after chapter of speech. So that is what Mark offers us. As I said, I think Mark is first, because if you have Mark, I don't know why. If you have Matthew and Luke, I don't know why you need Mark. But if you have Mark, as compelling a story as it is and the way it's told, I understand why Matthew goes, yeah, but there's more to say. We could talk about some of these other sayings of Jesus, not just the action. The action's nice, but there's more parables, and there's that whole Sermon on the Mount thing that we want to talk about, and there's the birth stories that we could bring in. So I mean, so you see why Matthew and Luke, I think, come later in my mind. It just makes sense. That to me is the most compelling argument ever for why Mark is first, because I don't understand, if you have Matthew or Luke, why you need Mark. But if you have Mark, I understand why you need Matthew and Luke. That's the best way I know to say it. So great. So how are we doing? Are we good? Great.
Timothy.
Yeah, don't worry. I know Timothy. Go ahead.
Said,
Don't try to say Timothy. Hi, Timothy.
he said, thank you for faithfully teaching the word and providing context every Wednesday.
Yeah, glad to do it. Thanks so much for participating.
We'll teach Thomas how to say your
We'll teach Timothy. We'll teach you how to say your last name once I'm sure I'm saying it correctly. But we have I have a great time doing this. We managed to keep power all night, so that's exciting too. Hope that you are continuing to stay cool. I hope you're continuing to endure through this time of separation. We will have our worship service on Sunday at 10, still on the summer schedule. And I should say, very excited, because the new camera, you probably noticed the past couple of weeks, the new camera is in, and we are going to mount the new camera this week. So the picture is going to be just like we want it, which I'm just so, I shouldn't be so irrationally excited about that. But if you understood how difficult it was to get the camera through customs, you would know how happy I am to have it and have it. It's quite a story. And my new best friend, David, in San Francisco, managed to get here. I'm sure you're not watching, David, but if you are, thank you. I'm glad to have the new camera. I hope that you will tune in for the picture. So Sunday school, combined Sunday school. That's right. Combined Sunday school, 9 a.m. on Sunday, will be led by our third Wallace in a row. Cindy Wallace 2 weeks ago, Bob Wallace, no relation, last week. This coming week, Thomas Wallace will be teaching the combined Sunday school. He does want it on the record that had he known when he was told it would be at 9 that Sarah meant 9 a.m., he would not have signed up for it. As a college student, he heard 9 and assumed Sunday school was 9 p.m., and he'd be happy to do it, because that's prime time for a college student. You're just getting started. But when he found out it was 9 a.m., he wanted to back out, but we told him he couldn't because he was already on the list. So he will bleary-eyed teach Sunday school this coming Sunday. And what is it? What's the title of what you said?
I didn't have a title, but
It was being a Gen Z Christian.
No,
That wasn't it.
You want me to actually look for it?
Yeah, I want you to find your title, because you're my son, and I wanted to.
Steve Stegall says we are so still in the dark.
Basically being a Gen Z Christian.
Being a Gen Z Christian. I wasn't that far off. I was close. The record should show I was close. All right. So hopefully that will be, Thomas will be awake for that, and it will be, so pray that Thomas's alarm goes off and he's able to get a shower before 9 o'clock on Sunday. So yeah,